Hi everybody, welcome back to another chapter of Emperor of Continia, an epic fantasy novel written by myself, Joe the Wigit Wilson, narrated by myself, Joe the Wigit Wilson. I'm going to go right into chapter 6. If you're interested in buying this book and follow along, I am reading from the second edition, which is now available on Amazon. Go to Amazon.com and look up Emperor of Continia, or this is also book 1 of the Dromon Saga, Dromonsaga, or you can search the widget and you'll find my books. Book 1 and 2 are out, and I am currently working on book 3. Let's get right into chapter 6. As I followed the royal servant to my room, my mind was on fire with thoughts. What did the king mean when he said he had a lot to tell me? Why am I not a commoner? I was expecting to be put to work as a servant of some kind or laborer. Maybe I was to be a servant to the king himself? Would that put me above commoner status? It was so much to think about. So much had happened to me that the more I thought about it, the more tired I became. By the time I got to my room, I was ready just to pass out. The moment I stepped into my room, I knew something was definitely up. In the center of the room stood the biggest and softest looking bed I had ever seen in my entire life. I was afraid to lie down for fear of never being able to find my way out. The room was circular and large. On the far side of the room was a pool of water with steam rising to the ceiling. The walls and ceiling were a sight to behold. They were painted to look like there was no walls at all. The ceiling was painted with the image of stars and the moon, deep in the night sky, and below the walls showed a forest all around. The forest looked a lot like Morganaris Woods. I decided that the bed looked inviting after all, and not too scary. The moment I flopped into the bed, I fell instantly asleep. I awoke, late in the night, to someone knocking at the door. The king himself entered, holding some clothes with a servant right behind him carrying a tray full of steaming hot food. I bolted straight up and bowed just as Rogert had. Stand up, John. No need for formalities here. I come to you as an advisor, not a king. I stood up, still not sure what to make of the situation. Okay, Your Majesty? What do you think of this room? The paint used was enchanted by the magistrat to give an outdoor scene of the guest's homeland. It seems to be showing Morganaris Wood at the moment. Very interesting. I put you in this room for that very reason. There are much grander rooms in this palace, but I had to see what this one showed. Sorry, Your Majesty, I was thinking about living here, I said, indicating to the walls. And my service to you was done, of course. That's probably why it shows this place now. Interesting. Well, here, John, put these clothes on. Not only do they look better than what you are wearing, but they will give you a certain privilege, if you will, the king said, handing me the clothes he was holding. I will be back in a few minutes after you have changed. When the king left, I looked at the clothing he had given me. It was a white robe with a hood and black sash. I assumed it was to be tied around the waist, the sash that is. When I put on the robe, it fit perfectly. I looked in the mirror and almost did not recognize myself. When I turned to look at the back of the robe, I noticed a big symbol that looked like the sun with a crown of silver rising above the forest. Below that were 2 crossed swords with a fist between them. The image looked to be made with mythic silver thread. It was the most awesome robe I had ever seen. I looked like the man I had always dreamed of being. Things were becoming surreal. I didn't know what to think anymore. Just then, the king walked in, alone, and took a good look at me. It fits you perfectly. No one else in the kingdom was able to fit into it. I figured you the right size, and I see I was right. The king walked over to the table where my food was and sat down. Are you going to eat, John? You must be pretty hungry. Yeah, Your Majesty. It's just that everything in the last few days has been so overwhelming. I don't know what to do anymore, I said, still looking at myself in the mirror. I can understand that. What I'm about to tell you will help you bring answers to your life, John. You're an interesting man. Unfortunately, I cannot grant you citizenship to Wergen at this time. What? Why not? I asked, forgetting my manners in front of royalty. I need you to fulfill a few tasks for me. These tasks will answer the question of where you belong in this world. I will give you these tasks in the morning, but as of right now, I suggest you eat and then get some sleep. Yes, Your Majesty, I said, bowing as he left the room. After he had gone, I ate a little bit of the food and went right to bed, falling instantly asleep. The night brought me many strange dreams, dreams of mist and strange creatures of all kinds. Some I had seen, and some I had not. I dreamed of Valaris. She was such a beautiful and strange woman. She was nothing like the elves I had read about in all those fantasy books over the years. I awoke the next morning to someone knocking on my door. When I got up to answer it, a servant came in carrying a tray full of all kinds of soaps and oils. He had a few towels on his left arm. "For your bath, my lord." "I am not a lord. I have done nothing to deserve that title. John is fine, thank you." "Thank you, Sir John. My confusion. I apologize. You see, only lords and men of great stature have stayed in this room in the past. The king holds you in high regard, sir." "Oh, thank you very much." The servant quickly left the room. I undressed and went over to the pool of steaming water that I had assumed was the bath. I climbed down the few steps that led into the warm water. It felt so good. I did not want to ever leave that spot. I probably wouldn't have if it weren't for someone else knocking on the door. I looked up to see Rogart bouncing into the room with a smile on his face. "Well, John, looks like I'm not done with you yet after all." He stopped and looked at me. "Yeah, those hot spring baths will trap you if you're not careful. Come on, the king is waiting for us in the dining hall. Get dressed. Meet me downstairs." As soon as Rogart left, I got out of the bath, put on the new robe, and headed downstairs to meet him. When I got to the bottom of the marble stairs, Rogart was waiting. He was wearing his normal blue armor, but now he had a blue cape with a symbol on the back tied around his neck. The symbol was a castle with a sword blade straight up through its middle. "Morning, Rogart. If I ask, what's that symbol on your cape mean?" I thought you would be asking about your symbol you wear first. But if you must know, it's a symbol of my status. I am Lord of the North Castle. There are 4 lords in Werrigan. Each is a ruler of one of the 4 castles." "Oh, cool. So you're a pretty important person then." Of course, I kind of already got that notion when we arrived. I was wondering about the symbol on my back, actually, now that you mention it. "I'll let the king explain that symbol to you when he's ready. Speaking of which, he's waiting for us in the dining hall." I followed Rogart through a few halls and through a large door into a dining hall, where the king sat at the head of a large oak table. Verdaneris was already there with Valaris, who was silently talking with the king. Rogart sat down to the king's left side and motioned for me to take the seat across from him next to Valaris. That was fine by me. "Let me begin, now that everyone is finally here." The king gave me a wink and continued. "I trust you all slept well. Now let's get to the point as to why I wanted breakfast with you all. I have a service to ask you to perform for me. Rogart, as I told you a little earlier, your service here at home to your castle will have to wait a little longer. I need you to act as guard to these 3 fine people on their journey." "Yes, my king," Rogart said with a smile. I have already briefed Rogart in private on what his duties are. As for you, little one, you are to go home and challenge the son of Lord Lenish to combat. It would be best for your people if you were to be crowned. You know this already. These 3 will help you in your challenge."
"Who are you to be giving me orders, old man?"
Verdaneris asked, a little upset. "Calm down, Verdaneris. You know it's what you want as well. Besides, we both know it will be better for your people if you take the crown back."
"All right, I'm gonna do it, but not because you told me to,"
Verdaneris said, crossing his arms in defiance. "As for you, Valaris, I know what your mission is and why you left home. Out of all the people in the lands you could have came across to help you, you have found the best 3 possible for the task."
"Begging your pardon, your majesty, but I was hoping for military support. No offense to you 2.
Valaris said, looking at Rogart and me.
"But I doubt 4 people could do what must be done."
"If you brought an entire army after them, you'd only succeed in getting a lot of men killed and run the risk of never finding them in the first place. Whoever, or whatever, is causing them to attack royalty will be alarmed if an entire army was on the hunt. No, I feel it would be better if you just had these 3 to assist you. Besides, there is still one element here you don't yet see. I do. And it would be the biggest help to you," the king said calmly.
"Yes, your majesty, I do see your point. But how can only 4 defeat the one who controls the rogue bands of Nords?" she said, raising her voice.
"You will have to trust me, Valaris," the king said, his eyes narrowing.
"Hold up. No one said anything about Nords. You can count me out,"
Verdaneris said, and slammed his cup on the table. "Calm down, all of you. There is no guarantee you will even have to see a Nord. If you do this correctly, you won't," the king said. Verdaneris slumped back into his chair, arms crossed and glaring at Valaris. Finally getting the nerve, I spoke up. "I'll help you the best of my ability, Valaris." Everyone looked at me as if it was the first time they had noticed me in the room.
When Verdenarius and Valara saw me, both of their eyes grew large. Verdenarius looked at the king. "Why does he wear that robe?"
"Because it was the only thing we had that would fit him," the king said with half a grin and a slight chuckle.
"Well, I'm pretty sure your little kingdom here could have made him something," Verdenarius said with a sharp tone.
"Yes, I suppose they could have. But don't you think it suits him?" the king said, grinning ear to ear.
Valaris looked at me, then at the king, and back again. "Now it makes sense. All right. I accept the help you offer, your majesty," she said, giving me a beautiful smile. There was something about that elf that threatened to take my heart away. When I looked into her eyes, I felt like I would just melt. And when she smiled, all I wanted to do was tell her I would be hers if she just only asked me. Okay, now that everyone knows what's going on, why am I still the loop when it's me that everyone seems to know about? I asked, a little confused.
"You will have to discover that for yourself, John. I know that's probably the last thing you want to hear, and it's probably very frustrating. Yet it has to be done this way." The king looked at me with an apologetic look in his eyes.
"Are those the tasks you wish us to perform, my king?"
Rogart spoke up, breaking the silence. "They are. You four will leave 2 days hence. Take the time to rest, prepare for the journey ahead. Now let us finish this fine meal the cooks have prepared for us." The king dove into the eggs and different meats in front of him. I looked down. All I had to eat with was a knife. I smiled and dug in along with everyone else. The next few days were going to prove very interesting. After breakfast, Rogart took me out to the training yard to show me a few things with a sword. The yard was just behind the keep to the south. There were at least 300 soldiers there, still all in training. Some brushing up on their skills, some learning new ones. It was fascinating to watch the men at arms as their various different weapons clashed in sparring. Each had a different color of armor, and some only in chainmail.
"Okay, John. Time to teach you a few things about the Wergen people. Our armor is a representation of our status. I wear the blue plate mail of a lord. There are only 2 armor types higher than what I wear. The king's bright white plate armor, and that of the king's champion, mythic silver plate mail. Then there are the lesser statuses, like the captain over there, who's wearing a brown armor, and his knights wear green armor. The men in training are squires, who wear a basic silver chainmail tunic and leggings. The lords are the king's right-hand men who handle most of the small affairs of the people in their section. I won't bore you with politics right now. Instead, let's go over the training master and test your skills a little bit."
I followed Rogart over to where a huge man stood yelling at some squires sparring with a blunted maces.
"Ouch, that one had to hurt a wee little bit, huh, Lumpin? Next time duck with your knees and not your head,"
the training master yelled. He stood a good 6 feet 9 inches tall and weighed at least 400 pounds, yet looked rock solid. I felt like I was in a giant's land.
"Morris, old friend, come here a moment,"
Rogart said with a grin as the training master came crashing over to where we stood. Both squires stopped their sparring to see who had interrupted their training session.
"I want you to meet someone." "Huh? By the looks of what he wears, I'm not sure how to greet him. How might you be, my lord?"
"No need for formalities, Morris.
You were my master for years. This is John. A very interesting person indeed. Pay no attention to his robes. I would like you to give him a few tests." "All right, Rogart. But I warn you, I don't like the idea of putting my squires up against this one, if you know what I mean."
"Like I said, pay no attention to his robes, and test him, please." "These 2 look to be all right for the job," Rogart said, looking over the 2 grinning squires. The one called Lumpin gave me a nasty grin.
"All right, my lord, but I warn you, they are in their 5th year, and some of my best, you know."
"That's fine, Morris. Bring them over here to this training ring, and we'll do unarmed first." Morris went over to the 2 young men and began talking to them. Rogart turned to me in a low voice said,
"Don't hurt them too bad, John."
"Give me a wink." When Morris came back with the 2 squires behind him, Rogart motioned for me to enter the ring. When I did, Morris told Lumpin to square off with me. Rogart turned to Morris.
"Just one, eh? How about you and I make a little small wager and put both of them against my friend John here? You think he can take both of these highly trained young men at the same time?"
Morris said, laughing.
"Oh, I'm counting on it. How does 50 gold each sound? Double the 1 odds. 20 to 1 says he knocks at least one of them out,"
Rogart said, pulling out a coin purse.
"Done,"
Morris said, shaking Rogart's arm.
"All right, you 2. This is an unarmed spar to test your friend John's skills. So don't go light on him. Have fun, and the winner is the last one standing."
The 2 squires gave me an evil grin as they began to circle me. I tried to gather all the nerve I could as the 2 trained squires chuckled under their breath. They were both a good 8 inches taller than me and at least 100 pounds heavier. This was not going to be much fun. The first one to my right swung his right arm in a high arc straight from my head. I blocked it very easily, swinging my arm around his, locking it before ramming my knee into his stomach. Then as soon as he bent over, I ran my knee again, this one into his face, knocking him straight back. As the second one advanced, a strange feeling tried to overtake me. It was very mild, but I could feel its presence trying to get me to remember something. I had no time to think about it, as the other squire rammed into my chest with his head. As we fell back, I arched my back before impact and rammed my knee into his belly. I threw him high into the air behind me, where he landed on top of the other squire, who was just trying to get back up. The one I had just thrown got up and proceeded to get into a fighting stance with his hands high, slowly advancing on me. I ran at him, jumping high into the air just a few feet from him, and planted my foot square into his face, sending him off of his feet, where he landed hard on the ground, back first. I stood there in a fighting stance, waiting for one to get up, but neither did.
Well done, John!
Rogart yelled from outside the ring.
Now pay up, Morris.
Morris took out the coins and slammed into Rogart's outstretched hand.
What kind of fighting was that, John?
Morris said, walking up to me. Kempo karate, sir, I said, bowing.
Don't bow to me, little one. I'm not royalty or anything like that. It was just a kind of fighting that I have never heard of in many years. A type of fighting like that has not been seen around this here since way before my time,
Morris said, an amused tone in his voice.
I'll just run along now and go see about getting these two healed.
Sorry about that, I said, a little ashamed.
Why?
Morris asked, confused as he walked away.
Come on, John. That's all I wanted to see for now,
Rogart said with a large smile.
Oh yeah, this is your share.
He handed me 4 large gold coins. What are these for? Rogart laughed.
To buy things with.
I had not seen much of Valaris or Verdenaris for most of the morning. I had heard from Rogart that Verdenaris was studying in the king's library most of the morning, trying to brush up on his magic skills. Valaris had not been seen since breakfast. Rogart taught me many things about the different weapons of the Wergen, most of that morning. At lunchtime, or as they call it, mid-meal, we headed back to Miss Marble Keep.
You did better than any I've ever taught in such a short period of time, John. And your hand-to-hand skills are amazing. Well done. I have business with the king after mid-meal, so you'll be on your own for a few hours. Why don't you go out and see the city, and try not to get into any trouble,
Rogart said and patted me on the shoulder. The force of that pat nearly knocked me to the ground. After a mid-meal of some kind of strange roasted beast and bread, I headed out of the keep towards the city with no real direction in mind. As a matter of fact, all I could think about was where Valaris was and if she was okay. She was the most intoxicating woman I had ever met in my life. She was so beautiful that I could not help but think of her most of the time. I loved her attitude. She was a strong woman in both body and mind. I walked along the busy streets near the North Castle, not really going anywhere. Everywhere I went, people kept staring at me like I was a ghost or something. Must be the robe, I figured, still walking along the road and not really paying any attention. I noticed a small path leading behind a building that looked like an inn of some sort. I figured I didn't have anything better to do, so I went ahead and followed it into what looked like a very old but pretty garden. There were many exotic trees with different fruits, ripe to the bursting point. It gave the air a very sweet scent. In the middle of the garden was a stone fountain. In the center was a statue of a young elf, holding a bow, overrun with a vine of some sort that had thousands of tiny white flowers all over it. The water from the fountain was crystal clear, with the sound of trickling water adding to the atmosphere. Below the stone fountain was Valaris, crying and staring up at the statue. I walked over to her and gently put my hand on her shoulder. "What's wrong, Valaris?" I asked softly. She looked up at me with those big, beautiful eyes full of tears. The sorrowful look deep within her eyes made me melt with compassion for her. She then gave me a weak smile. "I knew you would find me, John," she said, looking up from the statue. "This is a memorial of my brother, put here by the King of Wergen in his memory. It was an act of goodwill towards my father, the king. My father and the king were very close growing up. They had many memories together on their crazy childhood adventures. My brother and I were like a niece and nephew to the Wergen king. I'm so sorry to hear about your brother, Val. Must have been the hardest thing for you to see when that happened. Is there anything I can do for you?" I asked in a soft voice, stroking her hair with my right hand. "Just hold me, John," she said, reaching up, putting her arms around me. I felt like the world was spinning and waving all at the same time. My heart reached out to her, not only in sympathy, but also with a feeling I had never felt before. I didn't know for sure. I had never loved anyone before in my entire life, but it most certainly felt like love. I held her for what felt like hours. The most wonderful hours of my entire life. "No one has ever called me Val before. I like it," she said at last, sniffing. "John?" "Yes, Val?" I asked, using my left hand to lift her chin up, looking deep into her wonderful eyes. "Do you believe in the legend of the Morganaris Woodfalls?" "I don't know what to believe anymore." And at the same time, I want to believe in everything, I said softly, staring deeply into her eyes. I was afraid that if I looked away, I would lose that moment forever. The sky had grown dark, and the many lanterns in the garden lit up, adding a soft light. I kind of understand what you mean, she said, and rested her head on my shoulder. So do you believe in the legend? All I know is that you are the most wonderful woman I have ever met. If that means that the legend is true, then yeah, I guess I do believe. She looked up at me. Do you love me, John? She asked, taking her head off my shoulder, and stared deeply into my eyes yet again. Yes, I do, Valaris, Princess of the Mount Trojan Plains Elves, I said, gathering all the courage I had. I was tingly all over. My hands began to sweat to the point of embarrassment, and my heart was racing. She reached up and put her hand around my neck, pulling me to her, and planted on my lips the most wonderful kiss in my entire life. Nothing in the world mattered at that point. Nothing at all existed outside of that moment. For the first time in my life, time actually stopped. That is chapter 6 of Emperor of Continia. I will be releasing chapter 7 in a few days, and I'm still debating if I'm going to completely do the full book or not. Probably. A lot of people have been asking, in particular my son. So stay tuned for that. Again, if you want to find this book, it's on Amazon. You can even search Google by searching Joe the Wigit, W-I-G-I-T, Wilson. It's book 1 of the Draman Saga, Emperor of Continia. Thank you so much for listening.